Episode 1, I gotta come in raw. I don't have theme music yet. You may ask why I don't have theme music. I don't have theme music because it is symbolic of this stage of my journey. No, I don't have theme music because I haven't picked it out yet. Because this is really kind of like a test recording, kind of a test episode for the Fallen in the Forest podcast. Just think about what that expression means and think about what a podcast is, and boom, you got your symbolism right there. But I tell you the real truth, I don't have theme music for this podcast yet. I still don't even know if this is a podcast for which I want theme music. However, here we are, kicking it off, episode 1. You probably are not going to like this podcast if you don't actually like me. I've come to terms with that. I think it's really the truth because so much of it, like, I do other podcasts, right? And I do them with other people. Therefore, it's a very different energy. If somebody doesn't like you, they can like somebody else. If they don't like what you're saying, they can jive with somebody attacking what you're saying or just having a different perspective. This is really just all me, except for when I have guest co-hosts and guests on who I think is going to be interesting to talk to. And we're going to do a lot of that here. I don't necessarily know that it's fair to put that on the other podcasts. I think the other podcasts, being that they're more of a group thing, should require more input from everybody. In which case, then I just wouldn't want to be funneling a bunch of fucking guests on that maybe didn't belong, fit the energy, or perhaps that the other person wouldn't necessarily want to talk to. Not that I think that would ever really be an issue, right? The other podcasts I do with friends. It's not like I don't feel, we all have pretty extensive creative control in that sense. But at the same time, you don't really want to be forcing motherfuckers to do shit they don't want to do, listen to shit they don't want to listen to. That's why you motherfuckers can hit pause and decide that you don't want to listen to me. And if you haven't by now, then I think I got you. We won't do nicknames here, right? I believe that this is probably going to exist on a feed that calls me Billy Black, which is a name that is deeply rooted in some shit that I don't even know why I'm still using. It's a name I used when I was a recording artist. I guess I'm still a recording artist, but it's a name I used when I was a different kind of recording artist. It's really a holdover from when I used to make music that no one would listen to. And it's ironic because I've now chosen to use it now that I'm making podcasts that nobody listens to. And I don't know how I reconcile with that. I really don't. But we're not really doing nicknames here. My name is Malik. For all intents and purposes, not for all intents and purposes, the fucking truth of the matter is that is my name. Right? I'm 27 years old, if you didn't know, and therefore I have far outgrown the need for alter egos represented by names. Not that I don't see the point in it, not that I don't see the point in having a stage name or a performance name. It just feels strange to think of what I'm doing here as performing, and it feels strange to honestly use a name that I don't use anymore outside of the capacity of recording this podcast. But I'm Malik. You can call me Leak. My friends call me Leak if they don't call me Billy. And I got a podcast network now. Right? This is the third podcast that's being put out under the Put You On podcast network that me and my friend have started. And it's really been an amazing and humbling journey. I tinkered with the idea of doing podcasts for so long before I did it. Really at the behest of one of my dogs, he thought it would be a great idea for us. And I'm a huge podcast fan, have been pretty much since I started working. And I realized the value of having a job that allows you to listen to music or listen to podcasts. But also for me, music is a really, really, really escapist thing, right? Like if I'm not partying, I'm using music to try to feel things that I might not necessarily be comfortable feeling at work or as a real meditative thing, right? It's not to say I only listen to meditative music. You would be shocked. Or maybe you wouldn't be, because I think a lot of us have songs that's like therapeutic for us that is not the definition of therapeutic for somebody else, right? Usually you leave them shits in the past when you're 14 and then you kind of mellow out and become boring. But a lot of us don't really leave that shit in the past. We just pretend we leave it in the past. And pretending is kind of a big part of what we'll talk about on this podcast a lot. The goal of this podcast is not to have to pretend. The goal of this podcast, to be honest, and the reason I think that I gravitated towards podcasts in the first place is they kind of do create this little community of people. And as I've aged and become more cynical, I've realized that anytime you're patronizing anybody's thing, right? Anytime you are viewing something that somebody has the potential to monetize, you are always greatly appreciated. Or at least you're always going to be told you're graciously, greatly appreciated. But for me, a big deal is like, well, I'm a very vulnerable person. seriously, like personally in my own life when I'm by myself. I'm a very vulnerable person. I'm a person that spent a long time when I placed value in those things, looking for people that reminded me of myself in the world because I didn't feel like I belong. I think anybody can fucking relate to that. Make some noise for being a pathetic skinwalker. A pathetic fucking skinwalker, just trying to figure out how to exist as whatever the fuck you're pretending to be. But I think we all go through that. I think we've all went through that. But what you do find is there are more people like you. You may not be surrounded by them. You may not be able to access them as easily as certain people are able to access people like them. But there are more people like you. And there's two things you got to do. Number one, you got to divorce yourself from the idea that you're so fucking special that nobody could have any of the same ideas or any of the same thought processes as you. Some of you will have a more difficult time doing that than others. Some of you will find yourselves either surrounded by people who think like you or that you think in a manner that generally jives with kind of the social environment you're in. And some of you will feel like you don't belong and maybe you're trying to conform or maybe you are getting really, really comfortable standing out. What that looks like for you is kind of totally dependent on where you are in life, what you are reacting to, and how you have chosen to react to it now. But I got a podcast network. It's a baby podcast network, but on this podcast, I won't feel the need to belittle my accomplishments, to make other people feel like I'm not getting too big of a head. I see the numbers, nigga. I run this shit. I know that it's my little podcast. That don't mean I gotta call it my little podcast in front of y'all, but I got a little podcast. You know what I mean? And shout out to that again. We got to shout out to that, right? And for anybody who's listening to this, perhaps you're listening to this because you heard one of my other podcasts, or perhaps you're listening to this because you decided to give it a chance and you like what you're hearing. We in 7 minutes now, and we really just kind of about to get into the meat and potatoes now. So if you're here now and I caught your attention, you might fucking like me. But don't make that decision too quickly. So one thing you're going to have to understand about me, if you seek to understand me at all, if this is more than just entertainment for you, I have multiple personalities. It's kind of something that I've wrestled with. I think everybody's psyche is fractured, right? You have to be this person with your mom. You have to be this person with your brother or sister. You have to be this person at school with teachers. You have to be this person at work. I think that we're social animals, and I think that we're built to exist fluidly in that manner, right? I think that we are built to have these different relationships with different people, and you can see just in the way that some people talk, like my ex, right? She used to turn into a child when she was around her grandma, right? And it's like not turn into a child as if like she would just become a child or less knowledgeable than she was at the moment, but I noticed her voice. Her voice would go like into the kinds of cadences that her grandma probably spoke to her growing up, and it just was something that always struck me. Where it's like, I think we all code switch on some level, but knowing this person the way that I did, it stood out to me more, and I was like, oh wow, you don't ever talk like that with anybody other than your grandma, and she didn't even notice it. Like when I brought it up, she hadn't even noticed it. I don't know if she's ever noticed it, right? Who knows? But I think all of our psyches are fractured in a way, right? Some more extreme than others. For me, I've really been so many different people throughout the course of my life and can wake up and be really so many different people from day to day, week to week. The only things that don't change anymore are probably the goals, right? Like I make more of a concerted effort to stick to goals I set for myself if I find worth and merit in them, no matter what. Whereas before, I think, circumstances could really make you deviate, or just you could get, like, I like to say life gets in the way. I think for me and a lot of my peers, you watch life get in the way. Oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this more. I'm going to do that more. And then it's just like, it almost gets to the point where if you actually check in with them out of genuine concern, like, oh man, I hope it's going well. Like, how's it going? Like, you will start to annoy them by checking in with them about this shit. Why? Because it annoys them that they haven't done the shit either, but life gets in the way. Depends on what you do. Whatever it is, so many of us, we go to work and then we come home and it's like, this is all the free time I have. And God forbid you go to work and then you have another job and you go to the gym and or you have kids or this and that and the third. Everything that you pile on, you only get 24 hours every single day. Somebody out there is like, oh man, I don't look at time that way. Time is not real. Time is a construct, dude. Okay, nigga. Well, um, the Earth rotates. The Earth rotates around the sun, correct? And you're only gonna live about so many rotations. And where you live, depending on where you live, if you live in fucking Alaska or Antarctica, your situation may be different, but generally where you live, sun goes up, sun goes down, connected to your circadian rhythm, right? Encourages you to either wake or sleep, depending on if you're nocturnal or not. And all that shit equates to many effects which we have deemed the passage of time. So you don't have to buy into that shit. I'm simply telling you that one day you finna die. And oftentimes that is the greatest motivator for anybody in this world. As morbid as it is, sometimes you wake up and you are like, I've lived this much of life. That's a lot of life. There was a time I couldn't even imagine reaching this age, what it would be like. And if I live that amount of life again, I might be lucky. It's a blessing. In other words, I'm running out of fucking time. And I haven't enjoyed myself enough. I haven't appreciated my family enough. I haven't succeeded by society's standards enough. I haven't done the things that I want to do. I haven't even unpacked whether or not I want to do the things that I think I want to do. This is real life. And this is why these are the type of conversations you probably going to have on this podcast. So if you're here for the bullshit, that exists. We're going to do a lot of that. But on episode 1, I just want to give you a little bit of what I'm really talking about. Like, I'm being so real with you. I don't even really know how we got here from me talking about me being many people all wrapped into one. I don't know what we got here. This is what it's like to talk to me. I am sipping, by the way. I won't tell you what. I've taken a stance that it's not that I do a podcast for money, because I make no money from it. But I'm not just going to shout out brands that's not helping me out. Not right now, when I don't have to. When you can already imagine what I'm probably drinking. And when I can probably have honest conversations about what liquor I like and don't like. Right? That's engaging. That's content. What we can't do is just promote for the sake of promoting. Not here, not in this medium. I'm sorry. It's one of the few things where you may be reminded sometimes that this is a podcast. But again, like, if I'm having an honest, genuine conversation, I don't give a fuck. And therefore, you'll probably forget, as I will forget oftentimes, that this is a podcast. But finding my voice has been really difficult. So I've tinkered with the idea of podcasting for a while, ever since a friend of mine who was on a podcast brought it to my attention. I'd already been listening to podcasts, and I'd been on a podcast as a performer with art to promote. But I began to tinker with it, and I invested a little bit in a few things, and I started playing around on Anchor, and there were podcast ideas that ended up coming to fruition, and then there are ideas that didn't, right? But the solo podcast never really came to fruition, and that was always in the works. It was just a matter of figuring out how the fuck I wanted to do it. Like, how am I going to do this? Especially with as little production skill as I actually have. But we figured it out, and I think that through my other ventures, I've kind of discovered my voice and kind of how I like to sound, the kind of energy I like to bring to this shit. But again, it's different when it's a solo venture. Right now, I kind of have to carry the conversation, especially if a motherfucker ain't too particularly in love with me as they even begin to listen. Like, it's a lot easier to hook motherfuckers who already like you or think good things about you, really, than it is to be meeting a motherfucker for the first time through this medium. They either fuck with you or they don't. And I don't know what the hate listenership is like in podcasts. I would love to be the nigga you hate. I'd love to be the motherfucker you listen to because you hate. That would be phenomenal. Like, if y'all tune into this podcast and just laugh and laugh at the parts where I'm not joking, you're like, yo, man, this nigga sucks, or he's trash, or he think he's so smart and he ain't. Hey, man, whatever works, whatever gets the numbers numbering. But in reality, I thank God that I didn't have a podcast earlier, because I've worked through so much shit that it would have been so obvious to y'all. It would have been entirely too obvious to y'all that something was fucking wrong with me, right? That, like, yo, this guy, like, he's kind of a good guy. Like, this guy's kind of a good guy. I kind of rock with him, but he's going through some things. He's going through some things, and it's painful to watch him go through these things. I tell you, boy, I don't like some of the things that are creeping to the surface in this young man. I don't think I was a demon. I don't think I was the worst motherfucker, but I was far more impressionable than I should have been. Right? Given my relative level of intelligence, I feel like I was way more impressionable than I shouldn't have. But I was fighting certain demons, baby. I was fighting certain demons. It is what it is. I had to get some monkeys off my back. Some of them still on my back to this day, baby. But shout out to me. God bless. God is good. Hallelujah. We overcame almost a crippling social media addiction. I don't even have the time to get into what the throes of being addicted to Twitter, like I was addicted to Twitter in my day. I mean, I stayed getting kicked off that motherfucker and scheming my way back onto it. A grown ass man. Now, I was a little younger than I am now. I think that I would feel very strange if I was 27, 28, 30. Getting constantly kicked off a platform that I enjoy for like behavior I don't endorse. But oh man, was it bad. And it was beginning to show in my character like that. Like, I was kind of running from what my life was becoming, and like limiting my human interaction to like just being supported by people who also weren't living right. And stupid shit like that. You feel me? Like, and stupid shit like the social media addiction, and like just living to wake up and jump on Twitter and see how I could manipulate my dopamine levels. But so many of us do go through that, I think, and then never fucking talk about it. Because maybe we're still in the throes of it, or because maybe we're a little embarrassed that people will go back and find some of the things. Listen, my shit gone, man. Not because I sweeped it. It gone because they kicked me off, man. I'm telling you. Like, now, what is it you're going to really find is like the podcast channel on Twitter, and you're going to find my personal channel on Twitter, which is really just somewhere for me to discover great amateur porn. Like, my personal Twitter is really nothing but porn. Not so much intentionally. It's just they post a lot. Like, anybody who's been on Twitter, the OnlyFans scenes on Twitter, like, you know they post a lot. You know what Titty Tuesday is. You know what Wagon Wednesday is. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know this. You know these things. I don't really have to tell you. But I'm just saying that by nature of following a lot of quality amateur actors and producers, you begin to just have that dominate the feed. And I didn't want that for I could take that out on my personal feed, being that I have the podcast feed that really operates as what would essentially be my real feed. The stuff I see on there is the stuff that I want to see. It just also happens to be where I promote my podcast. You know what I'm saying? All three of them, by the way. All three of y'all getting promoted, nigga. I have 3 now. That's what we're doing. But anyway, in any case, I am glad that this happened when it did. And that's one theme, I think, throughout my life. And it's probably just the fact that I'm a human being and we're self-important. And we create stories out of everything that we go to. And that's part of one of the wonderful things I want to do with this podcast is highlight how many of us have really interesting stories that we just don't look at as stories because they're our lives. But, you know, I think that me having a podcast earlier would have possibly just made it so I didn't like the podcast later on. And who knows if I like the stuff I'm doing now. Who knows if I like the stuff I'm doing now later. But I think I will because it's coming from an honest place. And I think that that's a part of what this is for me. Like, I'm so tired of living dishonestly or living in fear. And you may or may not think I'm being dramatic, but again, I wouldn't be saying these things if I didn't think that somebody out there could relate. But I don't really want to hide who I am anymore. I don't really want to mask everything about myself anymore. I do want a space where I can be honest and open, and perhaps we don't find those spaces as often in person, but we do exist in a world where it's much easier to connect with human beings if you're looking to, right? And I think that's very much what the listener recorder relationship or broadcast, podcast, or whatever you want to call it, that relationship, I really think that that can be a crux of it. Because let's face it, you're not here because I'm popular. If you're listening to this, you're probably like going back in time to listen to it, because I doubt you listen to it on day one or week one or week two or week three or month one, right? But let's face it, a lot of us use the internet to create what we want to be positive connections. Use what it has created for us to do those things. And I think podcasting is one of the cooler advents of that, where you look at how it was able to shake up the space and how it was able to kind of dominate how people prefer to consume content on some level. I'm not saying it's overtaking anything. This is not like a competition thing. And this is way too deep into the podcast oversaturation phase for me to be trying to bring you news you haven't heard. Right. But I do think that's why I gravitated towards it as a listener. And I could imagine that that's why a lot of other people do too. For me, I feel like I've been full of so much shit for so long that you just kind of get to a point where you can't do it anymore. I think that's where a lot of people get to. It just might not look that way to you if you haven't gotten there yourself. But like many of you may be finding yourself now, or maybe could see yourself in the future if you're still kind of just doing what you're doing. I can't pretend to respect shit I don't. I can't do that anymore, right? I can't sit around and talk about shit that I don't care about. I can't do the whole celebrity worship thing or care in this parasocial way about people who are doing a job I want to do. I can't worship money blindly without understanding the way it works and what it is, which is a tool, I think, to accomplish things in the world that we have built for ourselves. I think for a long time, like a lot of you, I was so caught up in what other people respected and wanted to see, right? Definitely way more than what I respected and what I like to see. And if you live like that for long enough, I think that you see two things happen, possibly. One, that you will most certainly become tired of living like that. And two, you will probably distance yourself from a lot of things and people, or you will make a more marked effort to interact with the world as truthfully and honestly as possible, and to simply reap what that sows, right? What isn't for you won't be for you, but what is for you, you have a far better chance of getting next to when you are living as the person who you are, even if that's multiple people, depending on what you're around. I'm not a clinician or whatever you call those people, right? I can't tell you if you crazy or not. Only you and God and the government know if you crazy, for real. But I'm saying that what we living through every day can make us crazy. And if you're already crazy, that little extra crazy could be what changes everything. I don't want to do nothing that changes everything. That's where I'm at with it. I don't never want to do nothing that changes everything. How do you avoid doing something that changes everything? You try to live a little in a way that is more rewarding and fulfilling to you, my nigga. I don't know what that looks like. I couldn't tell you. If I could tell you, maybe I wouldn't be telling you. But I can't tell you. I do know that I could tell you what it feels like, right? The longer you do that shit. I could tell you that at times I felt like kind of like a hollowed out husk of who I was supposed to be. I know people can relate to that, right? Sometimes you be so angry and so confused and so hurt about, sometimes it be a life that you don't even live no more, right? But you can't give yourself permission to let go, or you can't forgive yourself, or you can't cope with a lack of closure on certain things. Maybe you can't cope with the closure. This is how complex that these niggas become, right? But, you waste time. And then you regret the time you wasted, even though you understand that it makes no sense regretting the time you wasted, because you ain't got no choice but to use the time you got left. But feelings and facts are two different things. And feelings ain't right or wrong. They just are. We know that. Right? But I can't never really be what people consider normal. And I think that's always thrown me for a loop. Because I don't think I invest in the idea of quote unquote normal. I know that it's kind of just an appearance. I know that you kind of just make yourself look normal. Like you kind of just look at the template for what is acceptable or for what garners the most support. And you do that. And then you can be normal. Right? But I know that I'm just... And who knows? Perhaps it's some sort of undiagnosed condition. I'm not in the business of self-diagnosis. So this is not something that's at the forefront of my mind. But who knows? Perhaps it could be any number of things. But I know that not for one moment in my entire life have I ever checked the box of like being a normal person. I think there's a lot of people I exist around who consider me normal because I will present to them as normal. But when you know kind of about yourself that you ain't what everybody else is, or at least you ain't what everybody else will show, you know what I'm saying? You kind of come to the conclusion that perhaps you don't have to be, right? And then maybe you have the ability to not demand normative behavior from anybody else that you love or care about, right? I think that's kind of the blessing of not being a normal person, is that if you can appreciate yourself for what you are, then you end up being the person that doesn't put the burden on anybody else in your life that you love to try to be normal around you. And that can free people. You can end up being a really, really freeing environment for people, right? Even if you perhaps don't feel like you have many free environments for yourself. I don't know you, nigga. I don't know you. I'm just trying to get at what a solo podcast is, nigga. That's all I'm really trying to do here. But like, when you don't like yourself or how you moving, I feel like it could be easy to either then be the type of person that likes everybody without having any standards or boundaries, or the type of person that don't like nobody, right? I feel like for a lot of people, it starts off at one and ends up at the other, because we like people like extremes. And like, if you don't want one extreme, you tend to fly all the way to the other side. And then eventually you reach the conclusion that everybody in every walk of life ever has always come to, that there's grays, and there's a middle ground. And you probably want to be somewhere in the spectrum that lies towards the middle than you do on either polar extreme. But I probably started off just not having standards and liking anybody really who would display that they liked me, and then ended up like kind of not really enjoying company as much and not really enjoying human interaction as much, but still really getting a kick out of it and enjoying it and valuing it, but like really looking for those real true moments where like I'm actually connecting with somebody, which I think that many of you can attest. Those be far and few between sometimes. And it's frustrating because we do feel that need to connect with people. If we didn't, then a lot of people's issues would be solved. But we do. But even like you get to know yourself, right? Like you get to understand who you are as a person. And when you do shit like that, I think, because I'm not really all the way there on none of this shit, but I think when you start to do that, some of this shit could be like more rewarding, right? Because even like as like a lot of guys, like for me personally, I know that what is often described as feminine energy, right, is something I try to embrace within myself now. Because a lot of times what people are pointing to when they say that is like emotional intelligence or vulnerability or communication skills, or even like being given the freedom to handle your emotions in the quote unquote wrong way and still be afforded a measure of grace, right? Like people, like there's like an old epithet among men that like that type of stuff is for like women and children, but you don't receive it as a man, right? Like, which I think like, listen, I'm not here to go into the science of what socially is going on with men. I'm not qualified to do that, nor am I sober enough to do that at the moment, to be frank, right? But I'm just saying, a lot of the times, motherfuckers will legislate shit like emotional intelligence and vulnerability and communication totally out of their life on a basis of not only do they not need those things, but they homeboys don't deserve those things. I don't understand that type of shit, right? And I won't be the person that forces myself to conform or to be somebody I'm not. right? I kind of understand, like, you start to understand, and everybody understands this at different times, right? Because there's people who had this shit figured out since they were young. But you kind of understand presentation and how you got to present to be accepted and make others comfortable socially or professionally. I'm not really talking about that, right? There's really nothing you could do about that. That's a game that you kind of got to play and figure out however you can make yourself comfortable playing it. Because if you don't play it, then you got to figure out how you can be comfortable being uncomfortable. Because I swear to God, uncomfortable is what you'll be. But there's power in knowing when you're playing a role. Because method acting is for psychopaths. I'm sorry. Don't shoot me. I'm just a messenger. Method acting is kind of for crazy people, right? Like, you gotta really think you this to be this, to pretend to be this. I don't believe in that. I don't believe that you have to pretend to be something in order to convincingly act as that thing. So you shouldn't method act your way through your life, right? That's so much of what we do. But you should not, especially not for the free. You method acting your way through life for the free. 9 times out of 10, you should never be Jared Leto for the free. Why would you ever want to do that to yourself for the free? That nigga don't even want to do that. He don't even want to be Jared Leto if it don't net him millions of dollars. So why the would you? I'm sorry. Like, if you're the type of person that motherfuckers don't run into a lot, you gotta lean into that shit, man. Why not? For pussy? For friends who can't ever know who you really are, or then they won't connect with you anymore, but those are your friends? We finna die. You know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to keep it real with you. We finna die. We are finna die. It's all over with. At some point in your life, this whole shit gonna be over with. You see what I'm saying? And you can't free yourself for any real measure of your life. I don't know about that. You can't free yourself from none of them demons you fighting if you pretend you're not fighting them. I die alone if it means I die being me. Because I lived with others and still felt alone. Right? I still cried by myself. I still had to water the things that brought me joy by myself if they didn't bring my friends joy. You still gotta love on yourself just like you love on that nigga or bitch at home. Man or woman. I mean, I don't know what your proclivities are. I don't know how you feel about the Ebonics. I'm just letting you know that's how to set it. You know what I'm saying? But if you love on yourself like you love on them athletes and actors, you might be shocked at what you could get done, but also you might get shocked at what you see in yourself. You understand what I'm saying? So we're going to have a lot of fun, I think, on this podcast. I think we're going to have much more funny episodes. I think we're going to have much more in-depth conversations on here. I do think this will be fun conversations. I'll be talking to myself, but I do think that this will be fun, and I think you're going to enjoy a lot of the people that I have on. But unfortunately, the woe of a first fucking episode is that it's a first episode. And therefore, it kind of has to figure it. You don't have it all figured out yet. You know what you want it to look like, but you don't kind of know what it's going to look like yet. You also, like, I don't have theme music. And I had to spend the whole podcast basically introducing myself and talking about myself, which is yikes, right? But this is, it's been a solid episode. We're gonna call it though. What's that? 33 minutes episode 1. We're gonna call it.